Welcome to XJW Healing Sessions. Today's topic is critical thinking and the original sin. Why am I talking about this? Okay, there's actually a really good reason. Many of the clients that I talk to have words that they express like maybe feeling like they're not good enough, feeling lots of guilt, feeling like they don't deserve. And that is a critical component to healthy growth, is having good self-esteem, understanding that we do deserve good things in our life. So when we're starting off from this basis of feeling like I don't deserve anything, I'm not good enough, where does that come from? There's a really good chance that it comes from here. So the last video, we talked a little bit about using critical thinking to decide whether or not the Bible is even the Word of God. And I'm going to leave the research up to you. And we're just going to look at the scriptures that we've probably all memorized. And instead of being in a platform where we're being told what it means, we're going to look at this through the eyes of critical thinking and decide whether this even makes any sense or not. Like, I'm basing my whole life off of something that was written thousands and thousands of years ago that may or may not be true, could possibly be a myth. But even if it is true, does it make any sense? Let's use some critical thinking here, okay? All right, so we're going to dig right into this book. So we all know these scriptures. I'm sure you can probably quote them as well as I can. Right there, starting in Genesis, right? In Genesis 1, verse 1, chapter 26, God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." So we are made in God's image. We're going to start with that. We are made in God's image. The reason why I'm starting with this is because there's a lot of things that we don't understand about God's thinking in the Bible, right? And we just have to have faith because we're just not smart enough to think like God. Well, according to him, according to the Bible, we are made in God's image, in his likeness. So we must have some intelligence about us, right? Okay, all right. Then God goes on to create the garden. He puts two trees there, and I always find this kind of interesting. In chapter 2, verse 9, he makes grow out of the ground every tree that's pleasing to look at, the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. Now, we don't really hear a whole lot about the tree of life. We don't hear a lot about that one, but remember that. Mainly what this whole concept of sin is revolving around is this tree of the knowledge of good and bad. So notice this. This is what Jehovah told Adam. And then we understand that Eve also understood this. But he says, Jehovah God also gave this command to the man: from every tree of the garden you may eat to satisfaction. But as for the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat from it. For in the day you eat from it, you will certainly die. Okay. So the consequence that God said for breaking this rule was death. He didn't use a bread pan illustration with a dented pan and that all the rest of the bread that is made out of this pan for all the rest of eternity comes out dented. He says, you do this, you die. Now, as a parent, any of you who are parents, I'm sure that you will probably agree with me that explaining consequences to your children is really, really, really important. As an adult, I know that there may be risks that I'm willing to take for myself that I would never take for my children. So in this story here, God says, you eat from this tree, you're going to die. He doesn't say, if you eat from this tree, all humanity will be cursed with sin forever until I decide to do something different. Does that make logical sense? Where's the critical thinking there? Were they really aware of the consequences? Well, it doesn't really sound like it from there now, does it? All right. So, again, continuing to use critical thinking, we're going to go on to chapter 3 here. Chapter 3, it starts off with words that we all. So, as we're in chapter 3 here, we're going to skip the serpent talking to the woman really quick. We're going to come back to that in a minute. We're going to go straight to the consequences because we all know what happens, right? She eats, she blames the snake. Adam eats, he blames her. Everybody's playing this blame game, right? And so, according to what God had promised, what was supposed to be the consequence? They were supposed to die. That was it. But notice that in 14, God throws a little bit of a temper tantrum. And he starts doing things that he didn't say he was going to do. He starts dishing out some consequences here that he didn't warn them about. First of all, he curses the snake, right? He said, "Cursed of you of all the domestic animals," right? To the woman in verse 16, he says, "I will greatly increase the pain of your pregnancy. In pain, you will give birth to children. And your longing will be for your husband. He will dominate you." Wait a second. That was a consequence that he didn't warn her about. To Adam, he says, "Because you listened to your wife's voice and ate from the tree concerning which I gave you this command, cursed is the ground. In pain, you will eat its produce all the days of your life, and it will grow thorns and thistles for you. In the sweat of your face, you will eat bread until you return to the ground." Okay, so God proceeds to do a whole lot of things that he didn't say he was going to do, first of all. Second of all, the consequences weren't equal. So let's say that you're a parent, and let's say you have a piece of cake on the countertop, and you tell your youngest child, "Don't eat this." And you tell your oldest child, "Don't eat this." And then when they do, they get punished differently. How does that make any logical sense? Oh, well, there's just things about God that we don't understand because we're human. No, 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 no. We just read. We're made in his likeness. We're intelligent. How does this make any sense? I want us to use critical thinking because I took this for granted for a long time. I didn't even think about it. I was just like, oh, well, yeah, here's a story, blah, 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 blah. But that's because we were not using critical thinking. In fact, quite the opposite. We were being brainwashed and indoctrinated, and we were read this story with confirmation bias, right? So now we're going to take off the goggles of confirmation bias, and we're going to change the characters in the story. That kind of sometimes helps break up the confirmation bias if we change the scenario just a little bit, change the names just a little bit. So let's pretend that there's an alien that made the universe, okay? And let's pretend like this one god alien makes humans in their likeness, and he decides to withhold information from them. And then let's say that there's this other alien, this snake alien, who comes along and says, "That's not fair. They're made in our likeness. You're not telling them the truth." And then the conversation begins. Notice what this sounds like without confirmation bias. So the alien serpent comes along, right? And he says to the woman, "Did God the alien really say you must not eat from every tree of the garden?" At this, the woman says to the alien serpent, "We may eat from the fruit of the trees of the garden, but God has said about the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, you must not eat from it. No, you must not touch it, otherwise you will die." At this, the alien said to the woman, "You certainly will not die. For God knows the very day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and bad." Okay, this matches what the alien creator God said in chapter 1 when he says, "Let's make them in our likeness." The alien serpent here says, God knows that if you eat, The very day you eat from that tree, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and bad. You know, I don't know how we skipped this part. We just read over the temper tantrum that, God the alien throws after they sin, right? But we somehow kind of skipped over verse 22. Verse 22, the creator alien says, damn it. Here the man has become like one of us, knowing good and bad. God damn it. Now, in order that he may not put his hand out and take fruit also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. And with that, he expelled them from the Garden of Eden. Okay, so this is interesting because the first thing that the serpent alien says is, God knows that the very day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened. And in verse 22, he says, here the man has become like one of us, knowing good and bad. He doesn't say the serpent told the truth. Actually, the serpent did tell the truth. God confirmed that. So what if he was telling the truth about death too? What if this wasn't a sin? What if this is like some controlled conspiracy theory? Why is this important? Why is this important? Because we're basing our self-esteem off of this. We're basing our self-worth off of these passages that we've been brainwashed with confirmation bias our whole life. When you read that scripture like that, how does it sound? Now let's take it from a psychology aspect. It is very damaging, very, very, very damaging for a parent to condemn their child for one action. Even this whole concept of perfection and imperfection, we also need to use critical thinking with that too, because perfection, imperfection, not meeting the standard, all of that crushes our growth and our self-esteem. And if this is a work of fiction, then we need to thoroughly, thoroughly, thoroughly debunk this idea of the original sin. And if you think about it too, if you were a parent, would you condemn thousands and thousands of generations for a small act of disobedience? If this is true, is this the kind of God you want to worship? Because that seems kind of harsh and it seems a little unfair. Now, if this is true and that seems a little harsh and that seems a little unfair, okay, so then we go back to the idea that we are made in God's image. We are God's children. So if we think it's unfair, our little pea brains that aren't as developed as God's recognize that this is damaging. This is unfair. How can you, first of all, not warn everybody about the actual consequences? You told Adam and Eve they're going to die. That's it. If I knew that I was risking my own life, okay, I'll make the decision based on risking my own life. If I knew I was risking the lives of all of humanity that was to come forth for all of eternity, I might make a little bit heavier of a decision here, right? Okay, so what does that, using critical thinking, what does that start making us, how does that start making us reason? Well, what if this is a work of fiction? And what if there is no such thing as sin? What if there is no such thing as falling short? What if there is no such thing as I'm not good enough? What if there is no such thing as perfection and imperfection? What if we're just human, doing the best that we can? What if we're learning and growing? What if mistakes are just that? What if it's just a mistake? What if it's just a process of learning? What if we make poor decisions and bad decisions and then we move forward from them? How would you feel if the word sin was eliminated from your brain? Whoa. Whoa. I'm not a sinner? How does that feel? I'm human. I'm a human being. I make good decisions, I make bad decisions. I'm growing and I'm learning. No, I'm not perfect. Nothing's perfect. Nothing's perfect. There's beauty in imperfection. How would your life start changing if you could let go of the idea that we're born sinners? God, I really hate that bread pan illustration. I haven't thought about that for years. I really hate that one. All right, so think about that. Okay, all right. So in our next episode, we will tackle critical thinking and the ransom sacrifice. And we'll use some critical thinking and see if we can kind of free up our brains in that topic. Okay, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will talk to you soon. Mwah.